After a Friday morning Mass, I was asked by a parishioner, "What Mass did you celebrate? You wore white instead of green, and the prayers that you used are not found in my living with Christ." It was a good question that came from a place of observation and attentiveness. On Fridays during ordinary time, and when there is no obligatory memorial to a saint, I learned from my first pastor to celebrate the votive Mass of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. It is a Mass that helps us recall on Fridays throughout the year the Friday that we call good, and the heart of Jesus that was pierced by a lance for our salvation. The collect or opening prayer for the votive Mass is quite beautiful because it articulates the desire and will of God that each of us may share in the eternal redemption that he has won for us, by first being clothed in the virtues of the heart of Jesus. What are these virtues? In fact, all of the virtues are contained in the heart of Jesus, but the scriptures reveal and put an emphasis through the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew on the virtues of meekness and humility. We just heard that in the Gospel acclamation. They use the word gentleness, another translation uses meekness, and it helps us to understand these virtues that we are to be clothed in. Being meek is not weak, and we learn the difference between the two in the action of Jesus, specifically on the cross. Being weak is that a person can't do anything. A meek person, on the other hand, can do something but chooses not to. The example being on the cross, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. He was meek. He could have saved himself and not died on the cross, but didn't. He chose not to use the power as the Son of God to come down from the cross when he was taunted by the watcher buyers. Humility is being concerned for others and a modest estimation of ourselves. Again, on the cross, the sole concern of Jesus is the love of the Father, to glorify him, and in so doing, dying and saving us. While teachers and students are in back-to-school mode, our readings take us to school and give us a lesson on humility and what it means for us in our spiritual life. The first reading from the book of Sirach sets the stage for this lesson with the guidance that the author Ben Sirach is giving to those Israelites who are in exile, who want to maintain their cultural and religious heritage by living lives of righteousness. At the time of writing this, many Israelites were living in Greece, and they were beginning to abandon the faith, the traditional teachings of the law of God that were handed on to them, and turning to philosophy and the philosophies of the Greeks. Nothing wrong with studying philosophy, but reason, in its pride, starts thinking that they could find an answer to everything outside of a living relationship with God. That movement in the human person still applies to us today, and why we find such wisdom from this book. And so it is through this reading, amongst many others, and the teachings and example of Jesus, like we find in today's gospel, that all the great spiritual masters all make sure to include the virtue of humility as the foundation of the spiritual life. Father Garrigou-Lagrange, a modern disciple of St. Thomas Aquinas, writes that humility is the foundation of the spiritual life because it counters the vice of pride, usually the beginning of every sin. St. Bernard of Clairvaux answers, when asked what are the three most important virtues for the spiritual life: humility, humility, humility. St. Teresa of Avila writes about humility as walking in truth, walking with God and with others. St. Catherine of Siena prayed, "God, you are all, and I am nothing." St. Augustine, whom we commemorate today, writes, "No one reaches the kingdom of heaven except through humility." Here is a man, if we read his confessions, who knows what that means and how he was humbled so greatly in his life so that God would exalt him in his gifts and talents. With humility, no longer is my life about me. It is about God and others, worshiping him as a community, as a parish family, and praying for each other, building each other up, serving one another, loving one another. Now, humility is a hard virtue to attain because we are also deeply rooted in the ego, in the I, in the me. Our culture does not help when we have advertising and phrases like "you do you" or "you first," and a whole line of technology that puts I in front of it. iPhone, iPad. You get the gist of it, the I generation. But there is a litany that is out there that can be super helpful. The Litany of Humility. It was a prayer that is presumed to be composed by Raphael Cardinal Mary de Val in 1863. I received this litany when I was at a young age. I hated to pray it, probably why it was given to me, but pray it I did. The point of this litany is to be delivered of our own selfish desires, reliance on self, and a distorted sense of self-importance, and a fear of sacrificing our own comfort for the sake of another. It hits right at the heart of so many wounds, whether it be insecurity, vanity, envy, and the great vice of pride that wraps it all together in a nice, beautiful package. Through the litany, it makes us once again see with supernatural vision of what we are created for, who we were created for. Created for greatness, called to be saints, which can only be found in God and serving others, not in the opinion of others, and certainly not in the goods of this world. It is here at the Eucharistic Banquet to which we have been invited to the Mount Zion, the city of the heavenly Jerusalem, where we see and approach God with humility. We see God in his humility in a tiny white host, the Blessed Sacrament. In that tiny white host, our Savior, Jesus Christ, veils his glory, his grandeur and splendor in bread and wine, and gives himself to us. Who cannot repay this great act of love? And so we approach him in humility for reception. And then in receiving the sacrament, we are clothed with that humility, clothed with the virtue of the heart of Jesus, and may Jesus grant us the grace to desire it. Pro tip: pray the Litany of Humility after Mass or after reception of communion. It will change your life and those around you.